Hey, this is Bryce, and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Jacko Trades. This is another episode of What's on the Bench. Let's go ahead and walk around the shop to see what we kept ourselves busy with. Thanks for tuning in. All right, so let's get started in the same order that we did last week. This bench is a little bit busier this week. Here we've got one of our parts bins for the Tamiya King cab. We've got these sway bar brackets. There's one that mounts to the, this one here mounts to the chassis. This one here mounts to the front lower arms. These are hard to find and someone's looking for them, so we're going to see about reverse engineering these, basically designing up some CAD models and sending them off to Oshkosh to have manufactured. And then they're also looking for some uprights for the Tamiya King cab, so we have a couple. We're going to go ahead and send a couple of these to the guy. And then we've got a couple of engines that have been torn down. So I spent basically the whole weekend tearing down and cleaning these two engines here. On the left here we have, this is an OS 46 helicopter engine. So this, when I do like engine cleaning and carb cleaning, I use, it's called a Chem Dip carb cleaner. And basically, it's a bucket, it's a 1 gallon bucket of chemical dip, and you put your engine parts in and you let it soak. And it knocks down all the kind of the oil and gasoline that's turned into lacquer over the years. So I accidentally left this engine sitting in that bucket and forgot about it. I had started cleaning this engine back before COVID, and I pulled that bucket out this weekend in 2024, and it had been sitting there for the whole time. And that's what, more than 4 years. It had started to, I think it came out worse than what it went in. So I had to basically strip it down even more. I had to do some stainless media tumbling on the engine. You can tell how this case here is actually a little bit darker than this. That's just staining from sitting in that bucket for 4 years. There's our crankshaft. Everything actually came out pretty clean. I'm happy with it. The big thing on these engines is the pistons are ringed, and it's very easy to break these rings, and the rings are pretty expensive, almost cost prohibitively expensive. And of course the bearings feel okay, but I've actually ordered some replacement bearings anyway, so that's what I'm waiting on, is some bearings and some screws so I can rebuild this. This is a 2-stroke engine. There's the parts for the carburetor. Even the carburetor was fused up. This is the throttle valve for the carburetor. So that guy sits in there like so. Well, hold on. That guy sits in there like that, and it's supposed to spin. You can see it kind of there. That guy spins and actually slides in and out as it spins as well, so it kind of engages the throttling needle as it slides in and out. But that was completely fused up on me. So through a process of soaking, tumbling, and stainless media, and then doing a couple more baths to clean things up, everything is looking pretty good, and we're waiting on some new bearings and some screws to show up, and then we can start assembling it. Over here we have one of the 4-stroke engines. This is a 120, so this is an OS FS series 120 Surpass. So that's basically a 1.2 cubic inch engine. These are really cool engines. And actually, before I get into that, this engine was a bear to disassemble because it had been sitting for years and years and years without. So the thing with Nitro engines is if you run them and then you stop running them and you don't put in some kind of like after run oil, that fuel turns into a sludge that basically locks up. And I think it's even slightly hygroscopic as well, because parts tend to start rusting. They start seizing up. And it's just it's nasty stuff that basically locks up your engine if you don't take care of it after running it and you let it sit. So this engine had been sitting for years with that fuel just kind of turning to sludge, and everything was locked up on it. The tappets were locked up, the rocker arms were locked up, the bearings were locked up, the camshaft was locked up. So I couldn't get anything apart easily. So with this engine, what you do is you rotate it so the piston is almost at bottom dead center, and then you have to pull that wrist pin out through that hole. And usually that wrist pin you can pull out with a magnet, but when that fuel turns to a lacquer and everything kind of locks up, it becomes quite challenging to pull out. There's even some videos on YouTube where the guy's cutting the connecting rod with a Dremel and just replacing the connecting rod. I was actually able to get that wrist pin out. Here's the wrist pin here. They're hollow, so what I ended up, my trick that I used, I couldn't get a pick in there to pull it. I mean, I tried to use a pick and I broke the tip of my pick off. I used heat. I used everything I could imagine to get it out. And this is after soaking it in that chem dip. The chem dip actually made it work so I could get the crankshaft out through here. That was also locked up on that bearing in there. Here's the crankshaft that goes in there. It goes in there like that. But that was locked up in there as well. And I did that chem dip for a couple hours, and finally that loosened things up to get everything out except the wrist pin. The wrist pin is still in there pretty good in the piston. And so to get the wrist pin out, what I ended up doing was using a drywall anchor, you know, those little plastic expanding anchors. And I found a small one that I could insert into this hole and then run a sheetrock screw into it. And that created enough friction where I could actually pry this out. And that was the only way I was able to get it out. But that was a nice little trick where a lot of times when you take these apart, you end up ruining them more than what you would have started with. Like here you can see, this was, I didn't do this, but somebody took like a flathead and tried to pry off the crankshaft cover, which is this guy here, and they end up putting a lot of dents in that. So I'm actually going to chuck this up in the lathe and go and clean off that face so I have a nice flat surface. And then this surface here, I'm going to go ahead and stone so it's flat. But the 4-stroke engine is really cool. This is the first one that I have taken apart in its entirety for these airplane engines. This is a little mechanical pump. It's a little mechanical diaphragm pump that runs off the crankshaft. And that helps with fuel flow to the carburetor. But what I thought was really cool in this engine is the rockers. So there's the rockers there. These are the valves. These are the springs, the valve springs. And then what's super cool is these valves and retainers are just like, well, at least just like my Volkswagen. I don't know about modern cars, but my 69 bus is very similar in that you've got these kind of retaining clips which are split, and they wrap around the valve stem, and they go into that little groove there. And so you put those two clips on, and you're compressing this guy over the spring, and you're putting those two clips on, and this thing pops up and it engages those clips, and the clips are tapered on the outside. And so that retains those clips, and it retains the spring for the valve. So the valve goes on there like that. This guy goes on there like that. Springs compress, you put the clips on like that, but you can see everything's like just ultra tiny. I don't know if I can do this one-handed. I sure don't want to lose these clips because I imagine they're dang near impossible to find these days. This is a discontinued engine, and then that retainer pops up like that, engaging those clips, and that locks everything nicely in place. I just thought it was cool how this is exactly how the Volkswagens are. My Volkswagen engine, and just to see something like that scaled down on a much smaller engine where those clips are almost microscopic was really cool to me. So yeah, this engine will be fun to assemble, and similar to the other engine, I'm waiting on new bearings. I got the bearings out, so I'm waiting on those. And then I can go ahead and put this together and throw it on a test stand and fire it up. Similar to the other engine, this one has a ring piston. The ring was fused inside the piston, but through that chem dip, everything loosened up. What else? Here's the sleeve. Your biggest friend when working on these engines is heat. I use heat to heat up the crankcase, and that loosens things up so you can pull stuff out. And that basically has to do with the fact you're dealing with dissimilar metals. The aluminum has an expansion rate that's almost twice that of steel, where this heats up at 21 microns per meter per degree C. And 21 microns is about 1/1000th of an inch, a little less than 1/1000th of an inch. And the steel only expands at 10 or 11 microns per meter per degree C. So that's about half the expansion. There's the carburetor. I have to get these things assembled soon before I forget how everything went together. But yeah, that's what's on this bench. These are really fun engines to work on if you don't mind the challenge of figuring out how to take them apart. Sometimes they can be challenging when they've sat for too long and everything has locked up on you. But that's part of the fun of the hobby. All right, so moving on to this bench, I've got a new car pulled down. Well, not a new car, it's an old car, but this is my Relarlo AK917 that I pulled down. I managed to put everything away that was on the bench, and now I've got new stuff pulled out. But last year I got this car and I kind of started taking it apart. I don't know why. I think I was trying to improve some things on it. And then I started stealing parts off of it for my Tamiya TT02 Speedrun Challenge car. I took the shocks off, I used the body, and so I've got replacement shocks here for it. I've got a new body for it. I've got a new motor that I picked up last year that I'm gonna run it on. This is a 4600 kV motor versus the 3660. So this should be faster. Running the stock speed controller. I got an adjustable motor mount for it. It has an adjustable motor mount, but it's really hard to get to, and I think you've got to take off the pinion gear to get to the motor mount screws, whereas this has these top mount screws. Now I'll admit this is not as stable as this design for the motor position, but it's much easier to access if you're doing a lot of pinion swaps, which you typically are when you're doing speedrun cars. I'm gonna put in this receiver for my radio link radio. This gives me better range than my NB4 radio, which this is set up for right now. And then I've got some aluminum uprights just to hopefully get a little more precision out of the steering. This is essentially a speedrun car, but I'm not gonna put a lot of effort into it. I do wanna get it back up and running instead of having it sit around in pieces. So that is, I'm hoping this is, 1 or 2 day job to get back together. We'll see. Then looking behind us, not a lot's changed over here. We still got our crawlers out. I got as far as picking out a new receiver for this crawler. Right now I've got an airplane receiver in there because I was running an airplane motor, because at the time that was the only radio I had that would do the mixing needed for this crawler. But now with the FlySky MB4 Pro radio, I can do the mixing that I need for this crawler. Also, that kind of happened in the middle of the week. I decided I was going to do some more work on my RC5 build. So there's actually a vintage car meet / race coming up in June. I wanted to try to see if I could get this car finished for that vintage car show. More just a show and tell, but it's basically a fifth scale version of an iconic vintage car. And so I've started going through it and figuring out what parts I need to replace and what I need to finish. I want to get wheels that are printed in the correct color. These are actually still the glow in the dark wheels, and I've got green wheels on the other side. And so I found some PLA filament that is the right color to kind of the yellow RC10. The darkened yellow color as the cars have aged over time, not the bleached white yellow. But anyways, I have good color matching on the parts, so I'm going to replace those parts. I'm going to put in black suspension arms. I have made some tweaks to the rear suspension arm because the geometry of these arms is such that when the shocks compress, the dog bone does quite a bit of traveling, because the dog bone is actually longer than the arm, and it's way longer than the upper arm, which is a short arm. So it's basically short, long arm setup, which means that this kind of stops compressing when the dog bone hits the bottom of the cup. So what I've done is I've made the arms a little bit longer so I can get more suspension travel. And then to help prevent the dog bones from popping out, I'm going to use springs that help center it between the two dog bone cups. There we've got a little gear cover, which I don't think I've ever shown. I also started working on a CAD model for the body for this. So I'm designing the buck, essentially, that I will use to vacuum form the body. I will make that up in multiple sections, probably have to be between 4 and 6 pieces that'll then get glued together. And then that'll get, I'll use that to pull a body with a vacuum former. Now that's the other challenge, is I don't have a vacuum former that can handle something this big, so I'm gonna have to make kind of a benchtop ad hoc vacuum former to make these large bodies. But it should be a good tool to have in my arsenal, because my vacuum former isn't big enough to do any bodies, whether it's 10th scale or 5th scale. So having a vacuum former that can do bodies will be very useful kind of moving forward. And that takes us over to this back corner. I did get some time in on the Outlaw Raider. I got it out for some more running, trying to get some more video footage. I'm having problems with this motor stalling, where it sometimes doesn't want to start, and part of it's because it's not a sensorless motor, and so it's kind of that cogging action. And this is a 4700 kV motor. I'm running nickel metal hydride on it, so I'm not really running heavy batteries, and I'm running big tires on it. So all those variables kind of factor into the fact that this truck has kind of a slow start. Pretty good top end, but it struggles to start. So I'm looking at going with some lower kV motors, hoping that I get more torque out of them. This one here is a 3100 kV, and I think this one here is a 3900 kV versus the 4700 kV. So hopefully I get better torque out of these motors. If not, I might just have to throw in one of my hobby wing setups. The other thing is, when I'm running this, it's got a very noisy drivetrain. You can hear the gear diff kind of grinding inside. And I've seen where someone has upgraded the diff with a Tamiya DTO2 ball differential. I know ball diffs from the Tamiya cars is kind of a 4-letter word, but anything is better than the current gear diff that's in this car. And these gear diffs are known for not lasting very long. I'm just afraid. I want this car to be kind of a decent, reliable runner. And so my intent is to do whatever I can to make it robust, so I don't have to worry about it blowing up on me. So I'm looking at upgrading the differential on that. That will be a custom diff, because it's not a drop-in, and the gear on it that comes with that diff, I think is like a 51 or 53 tooth, and this should be a 44 tooth. So probably what I'm going to do is 3D print a diff gear that'll go into this car. And that brings us into this part of the shop. So here we've got one printer running. These are the rear lower arms for the RC5. And then here we've got the front lower arms for the RC5. And then here's our bucket of parts that we've been printing. These are the color correct wheels with some new tires. We've been printing out some new front and rear tires. And then all the associated parts for that build. So I changed out some of these parts, like this lower shock spring retainer. The original one didn't have a slot, similar to the original RC10, but it's such a pain in the butt to swap out that I wanted to go ahead and put that slot in there to make it more convenient for working on those shocks. So yeah, we're getting parts out for that rebuild. And then we've got our Postomatic. We spent the weekend organizing our filaments. You can see down here, these are all open spools of filaments. Not even our new in box filaments. But I cleaned this up by kind of respooling similar filaments, where you get these kind of half rolls where you're afraid that you're not going to get through the part, so you end up with rolls like this that are barely full of anything. And what I have learned over the weekend is how to splice these spools together. It's kind of clever, but there's a steep learning curve. It's harder than it looks. And then once you splice it, you can re-spool it. And over here, I'm working on the dust port for my CNC router. So I got this thing that I designed and modeled up, I think last year or the year before. That just pops on there, and then the vacuum nozzle goes in there. The nozzle that I want to use is a little bit bigger than what I designed it for, so I have to redesign a new part that'll fit this nozzle, which will be better. You can kind of see how that gets necked down quite a bit, and so this hose here will have better flow and still retain some flexibility so that it doesn't greatly affect the router motion. All right, and that's a wrap on another episode of What's on the Bench. If you have any comments or questions, go ahead and let us know below. Otherwise, thanks for tuning and watching. Take care. Bye.